Thank you for joining us on our QTV Business and Economy program. The Business and Economy program is intended to promote the ideals of a corporate Gambia identity with the objective of forging partnership through dialogue between the public and the private sector, civil society organizations, and the international community. In today's episode, we continue our dialogue on the business environment. And in specific, we'll be talking to the Managing Director at the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation, Mr. Mohamed Manjang. We have invited Mr. Manjang here to help us better understand the objective for which the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation was created. We are aware that since its creation under an Act of Parliament in 1981, the Social Security Housing Finance Corporation has delivered a number of impressive results. But equally, we know that as per the provisions of its vision and mission statements, the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation is yet to live up to its expectations. I would do a brief overview of Mr. Manjang. I would give a brief bio of Mr. Manjang. Mr. Mohamed Manjang is the Managing Director of Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation, bringing more than 2 decades of executive experience with a leading financial institution to that role. Previously, Mr. Manjang was the Regional Chief Finance Officer for Africa at Standard Chartered Bank, where he successfully led the decentralization of regional finance, resulting in enhanced efficiencies, established tighter controls, and improved regulatory relationships. During his tenure as CFO Africa, he played an integral role in the research, selection, and introduction of a new banking system. He also drove capital management across 13 countries in Africa, amongst other things. Prior to this, Mr. Manjang served a dual function at Standard Chartered Bank as CFO for Southern Africa, Executive Director for Botswana. He spearheaded the re-entry of Standard Chartered Bank into the South African market and simultaneously played a key part in the integration of a South African internet bank acquired by Standard Chartered. In his earlier career with Standard Chartered, Mohamed served in various executive capacities across the group. Mohamed is a fellow of Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA, and holds a dealing certificate with distinction from the Financial Markets Association. He has undergone several management training experiences, including leading across boundaries, the Executive Management Program on Managing Diversity and Cultures at the University of Oxford, Said Business School. Mohamed Manjang is the chairman of the Board of Directors of Gum Petroleum and Trust Bank Limited. Mr. Manjang, welcome to the Business and Economy program.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts, and thank you for having me.
I want to start by making reference to the vision and mission statements of your institution, the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation. And here I would quote the vision. Okay. It says the corporate vision at Social Security Housing Finance Corporation is to be the leading institution in terms of financial management, organization efficiency, operational effectiveness, and customer service delivery. Beside it is Social Security Housing Finance Corporation's vision to be the best in comparison to similar sub-regional, regional, and worldwide institutions. We also have the mission, which is to provide adequate social protection for workers. Adequate social protection for workers. I'm emphasizing that because we would come to that later on. Facilitate social shelter delivery on a sustainable basis, and invest funds of the corporation to achieve optimum returns possible and contribute meaningfully towards the socio-economic development of the Gambia. By your assessment, and since assuming the office of the Managing Director, what is your take on performance of the corporation you now head from the perspective of the vision and the mission?
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, those are still valid missions and vision statement of Social Security. I think Social Security from inception up to the early to mid 2000s, it was well capitalized. It was prudently managed. I think our investments over that period were predominantly in high-yielding government securities. And the institution at the time was relatively young. So the current challenge service problems we are encountering were not evident at the time. So if you actually look at it up to that point in time, up to the early mid 2000s to early to mid 2000s, we've been delivering quite well, successfully against the target set in the mission and vision.
By mid-2000, you mean in what, 2010?
2003, 2005, thereabouts. So from inception to that date.
Okay.
If you compare our performance right across the region, we stood out. We're one of the best performing social security institutions, both financially in terms of what we were doing to the membership of the funds that we run, and also what we've done in the housing sector, because that is when we started the Bakote housing in 1980. So I think we were doing very well up that time. Obviously, since then, both performance financially and operationally has been underwhelming. So I think we have been struggling to some extent with those objectives for several reasons, and I'm sure as we go through this program, we will deal with some of those things. So I think really, if you look at it, it's mixed. Mixed, we've done well from the early parts. We're having challenges in the later parts. So it really now it's a question of what are we going to do going forward to turn that around and bring us back to delivering on the mission and vision.
Right. I want to do a follow-up question in terms of the point you just made, that from inception, 81, to 2003, 2005, you've done quite well, you know, even to the extent of relative to other housing finance schemes, I mean, within Africa or around the globe. But in particular, I want to understand what has been the change, if we take 2006 up to date, what has it that has been the main contributing factor in terms of the lackluster performance compared to your inception to 2005 years?
I think the early parts of the fund, because it was relatively young, there are certain key metrics in social security. One of them is, say, contribution arrears. At the early part of the fund, the membership wasn't that many, so I think we were quite effective in contribution collections. The government paper available at the time, our investments were largely in government paper, and they were high yielding. So we were able to actually place funds in low risk, high yielding investment securities. So I think the staff complements weren't that significant. So I think combination of all of those things actually enabled a significant improvement in performance and delivery on. Now, if you're a young fund, the service challenges would really not be, you wouldn't feel it that much, because there aren't a lot of people who are retiring and actually queuing up for processing and stuff like that. So I think all of those things is a reason for the performance.
If I read you correctly, I get the feeling that you are of the view that you know, relevant improvements could be brought to bear at the social security. Primarily, if I read you right, you're looking at inception to around 2003, 2005, and where we stand right now. As a follow-up question, I want to understand what is it that what legacy would you want to leave at the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation, and how do you envisage that you would go about achieving that legacy?
Okay. I will respond to that in 3 areas. First, Social Security itself. And I'm looking at Social Security to cover the Federated Pension Scheme, the National Provident Fund, and the Injuries Compensation Fund. So I think, like you said in our vision, is really to provide social protection. One of the legacies that I would want to leave behind is to extend the coverage of social protection beyond just the formal sector. I think Social Security right now, our focus and concentration is all on the formal sector. But I think estimates suggest that about 60% or so of the Gambian workforce is actually self-employed in formal sector, and there is no social protection available for them. So I think, so the legacy really, if you look at it from the Social Security point of view, is actually the ability is to extend the coverage of social protection beyond the formal sector to cover the informal sector. Avail these people some possibility of retirement benefits once they are no longer in a position to earn income. And I think so that is one of the legacies I would want to leave behind in Social Security. But also within the Social Security is actually to enable the active membership now that their pensions, be kind of index linked. So it's really not waiting as we do now, waiting for an actuarial valuation to actually give pensioners. I think we should be in a position to index link based on maybe CPI or something, but index link so that cost of living can be maintained. So I think from the Social Security perspective, if we can achieve those two, that would be a good legacy. Now, if we then come to the housing, I think what we then need to do in housing is, up until now, all our housing projects are concentrated in the Greater Banjul area. I think what we have to be able to do, at least a legacy that I would want to leave behind, is to have housing decentralized. Decentralized that will help towards the rural-urban migration, but also will help towards development outside of the Greater Banjul area. So I think decentralizing housing would also be a legacy that I would want to leave behind. Also within the housing sector, I think one of the biggest challenges we have in this country is affordability. I know we talk about affordable housing as one of our key objectives, but it is very problematic. Problematic from two angles. One, cost of financing is quite expensive in this country, and two, just the income levels. It's difficult to support reasonable mortgages for people to have adequate shelter. So I think if we can address those two in housing, that will also be a very good legacy to leave behind. Now, thirdly is really just improving the operational efficiency of Social Security so that we make it scalable, we make it efficient, because I think once we can achieve those things, we will then be in a position to really reinvest in the real economy. And Social Security is, as in most other parts of the world, their role is not just the pension fund. They tend to be the largest pool of long-term investable funds in any country. And I think with those kind of funds, if you're able to build efficiency in that business, it can actually be a significant catalyst in development. So I think if we can achieve those things, those three things in those three areas, I think that will be a great legacy to leave behind.
Well, let me first of all say that the things that you have itemized as the things that you want to leave as your legacy are quite formidable, and in the event that you are able to achieve this, it would naturally help in terms of moving the goalpost as long as Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation is concerned in this country. It is interesting that you spoke about one of the legacies that you want to leave being able to provide affordable housing to the informal sector, because the concentration at the moment seems to be more on the formal sector. I had the Director of Planning at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, who is one of the key personnel behind the development of and coordinator of the National Development Fund. I mean, the NDP, the National Development Plan. And I also had the Permanent Secretary from the Office of the President. And one of the things that we discussed was, if the NDP was going to be realized, and here we were talking about funding gaps and the challenges inherent in the economy, that we have to look at formalizing the informal sector. And you are pretty much alluding to the same thing, but you were talking from the perspective of Social Security being able to expand its net, if you will. Now, the question I want to ask is, most of the people that operate within the informal sector, not all of them, but a good number of them, percentage of them, choose to operate within the informal sector because perhaps they don't want to pay taxes, they don't want to be liable to pay for even things like injuries compensation funds, contributing on injuries compensation fund for their employees, or even the National Provident Fund. So how do you think that you will be able to get the informal sector, to benefit from the housing scheme of Social Security?
No, housing actually, I think housing is open to everybody.
Okay.
It's not just restricted to the formal sector. Because when we do housing, really we assess, and any Gambian can actually apply, whether you are a member of our schemes or not. So I was really, when I was talking about the informal sector, it was more dealing with the Social Security itself, the protection. I think what happens in the informal sector, yes, those are factual statements, but I think the challenge in the informal sector is that you work, and they work beyond 60 in most cases, but there will come a time when you are no longer in employment, and those are the times where the Social Security protection comes to play. Now, for us, we need to have a reasonable return that we can demonstrate to these people, that it actually makes sense, because it's almost like, if you like, kind of an Osusu-like, but in a much, it's a longer term thing. So if we can convince that we actually create value and provide value for you, that you're actually saving money towards your future retirement, that you're actually saving money to cover you when you're no longer in employment, I think we can create, it depends, we have to create a value proposition that convinces them to join us. Now, we're not there yet, but clearly that's an objective that we will drive towards getting. Now, it's clearly very different from their unwillingness to pay taxes or join the formal sector because of the financial implications on them. This particular one, I think the implication at the end is actually a benefit that you will get, or your immediate family, if you do not survive it.
Yes, let's make progress, because I want us to touch on a number of issues.
Okay.
And you're a former chief financial officer for Africa with Standard Chartered Bank Group.
Yeah.
And has served as CFO in Southern Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, and as branch expansion project manager and business head, global markets. These are all experiences that seemingly dovetail very well in terms of your newfound responsibility. I mean, if I look at what you've done in the past, your previous experiences, I could perhaps boldly say this is someone that could really help Social Security Housing Finance Corporation move to the next level. Here I'm talking exclusively on your experience. You spoke about the legacy that you would want to leave behind. Three imperative points you've made. But if I were to ask, what three changes must obtain without compromise at the Social Security in order for you to be able to not only deliver on the mission and vision statements of Social Security, but that would also help you to achieve your legacy? What are the three things that you would pinpoint?
Yeah. Well, I would say first we have to be lean and nimble.
Lean and nimble.
We have to be lean and nimble. We're very cumbersome. We're a very cumbersome institution. Our processes take a lot of time, and you cannot have an operationally efficient institution that is that cumbersome. So lean and nimble, right? It's number one. Number two, we have to be significantly more productive. As an institution, we need to be, and I think that's a factor not just for Social Security. I mean, these points I'm mentioning is probably right across the country, but significant improvement in performance. I think that will be number two. And certainly number three will be automation. We have to really automate. We have to move away from manual processes and automate our systems. Automate to such a point, for example, we have to be anticipatory in, say, retirement processing. We don't need to wait for people to come to us to tell us they've retired. We've got your biodata. So we should be able to anticipate before you even come. By the time you're there, your check is available for you to pick up. So we need to automate to the point, for example, you don't need to ask for your statement. You should be able to go online and get your statement. We should automate to a point where you are in a position to be selective in investments you want, if you are, for example, in the Provident Fund. So I think so. Those three things, for me, are critical critical success factors if we are to move forward.
I totally understand what you're talking about, but Social Security has been a dumping ground in terms of politicians wanting to appease, their, people that voted them into power. So I'm a minister, somebody comes to me and say, two of your jarbars are out of job, I don't have employment, and I call the MD at Social Security and say, help bail me out. And this is why Social Security have become bloated. I'm making this point to say, amongst other reasons as well, I'm making this point to say, if you want Social Security to be lean and nimble, perhaps you could be mad in controversy. Because people would say, well, the guy is here to chop down the numbers. Politically, government may even say that, yes, we are looking at creating employment and we want to be lean and nimble. Manjang wants to be lean and nimble, and that being the case, he probably have to have some people go. And also, if you want to be lean and nimble, it means that those that you're going to retain within that lean and nimble composition, they have to be very productive, which is the second point that you mentioned. Not only that, but for them to be as productive as you want, salaries would have to be improved, and perhaps benefit schemes would have to be enhanced, as well. Automation is a giveaway, perhaps less of a controversy.
Yeah.
But these are all three things that I truly believe needs to happen, if you're going to realize and achieve your legacy. Not only your legacy, but also for the country to benefit, to benefit as well. Yeah. Because as you rightly said, these are all three areas that could apply to any PE in the economy. But are you concerned about the potential controversies that could arise from you perhaps moving to realize this in order to achieve the legacy and also to deliver on the vision and the mission statement of Social Security? Because to deliver on the vision and mission statement of security, something has to give, and these are things that we should start with. Are you prepared to deal with the controversy?
No, absolutely. Some of them will be controversial because every time you talk about being nimble, being lean, it will have implications on people. But I think there are short-term pains for long-term gains. I think that's what it is. And I think people have to be willing and prepared for the difficult decisions in the short term. But long term, they pay off. I think if we are efficient, like I alluded to initially, because of the nature of our funds and what we are able to do and can do with those funds, we can actually be net creators of employment. Because our funds, we have to invest in other institutions. We have to invest. We can actually be investing in the real economy. And if we invest in the real economy, we will be creating jobs, we will be creating employment, we will actually be driving the economy. But to be able to do that, we ourselves have to start from a point of being efficient. Now, I understand in the short term, it will be, yes, it may be controversial, but I think it is about us selling the idea collectively as an institution. We have to buy into the change. Understand that this change in the long run will be good, not just for Social Security, but really for the economy as a whole, and will be net creators of employment. It goes without saying that if you ask people to be productive, you clearly need to compensate them more. I think it's obvious. I think if you see the private sector does quite well, it really drives people for productivity, but in return it rewards them for it. So I see those two things as going hand in hand. But this is going to be over time. I think it's something we need to start with and deliver it over time. I understand the sensitivities. I understand the challenges and difficulties in this country as far as employment is concerned. So I'm not. I am not naive to those implications. But equally, if we really want to make a difference, if we really want to make a change and grow this country, there are some hard, difficult decisions that we have to be willing to take.
Okay. Let me come to the Social Security, and in particular, we perhaps begin to discuss the funds, that you manage. The Social Security Fund, a fund comprising of the Federated Pension Scheme, which is an insurance scheme, and the National Provident Fund, and by extension, the Injuries Compensation Fund. If we look at the performance of these funds over the years, are you optimistic that we could realize better ROIs and ROEs? The reason why I'm asking this is you alluded to it earlier on when you made reference to the fact that from 81 to 2003, 2005, the performance of the fund was quite impressive, and likely as a result of the fact that you were investing in treasury bills, which are risk-free, but then the risk-free instruments, were quite impressive at the time, 20, 25. I think there was even a time that perhaps it had gone up to 30%.
Very close.
But if we look at the realities of the economy today, this government has been compelled by the IMF and other, international institutions as well, for them to tighten their belt in terms of managing their debt levels, given the realities that obtained vis-a-vis the GDP debt levels ratio. So where are the returns going to come in from for the various funds that you manage and administer?
Yeah, you're right. The funds have not been doing well. 2015 we did about 14.7 million at a consolidated level operating profit. And 2016 was actually worse than 2015. 2016, at a consolidated operating level, we made a loss of 1.5 million, 1.5 million loss. But am I optimistic that this we will do better? Yes, I am. I am optimistic. Perhaps it's too early to be excited, but I believe we're seeing a couple of green shoots. And which are suggesting that we are about to turn the corner. I think our 2017 performance, we've made like 82 million in 2015 in operating profit. So we're actually moving from a 1.5 million loss in 2016 to an $82 million profit in 2017. And what I'm seeing so far in 2018, despite all these challenges you're talking about, I'm seeing if we don't make similar level, we'll probably make similar or better in 2018, despite this thing. And we're doing that because we are better in collecting our contribution incomes. But we are also very laser focused on our liquidity. There's very little idle cash around. If you see, we have increased our liquidity holdings, both in treasury bills and bank term deposits, from about 700 million around the end of 2016 to somewhere about 1.2 billion now. So that's like an 85% increase in the portfolio. So we're very laser focused. But yes, there is significant headwind, interest headwind. There's no doubt about that, and that will impact us. But we are equally driving our other investments. For example, GAM Petroleum, we will receive a significant dividend this year. Much more than we have ever received from GAM Petroleum. And that's coming because GAM Petroleum is doing extremely well, or did very well. The year ended March 2018. And we will receive it. So we will be compensated for what we lost in interest revenue. We will be compensated, one, by the significant increase in volumes, but also what we will be generating from our other investments. And we are very focused on all our other investment, really driving them to generate revenue. So yes, I am optimistic. I think I am seeing green shoots. It may be a bit too early to be excited about, but I think we're in the right direction.
Excellent. I was actually going to...
Then clearly there is also the cost angle, which is within our control. We're very cost disciplined. So really a combination of being cost disciplined and driving the top line, I think the net effect of that will be improvement in our overall performance.
You spoke of the 1.5 million loss that was incurred in 2016 relative to the profits in 2015 of 14.7 and the increase in profits of 82.1 million in 2017. Are those, percentage-wise or performance-wise, commensurate to the performance of the NPF and the HFF? Because the NPF, the National Provident Funds, and the Housing Finance Funding Scheme or Housing Finance Fund made losses. Not only made losses, but the expenses were more than the revenue.
Yes.
So are you saying that they have now turned the corner?
every single fund in 2017 was profitable.
Excellent.
You know, in 2016, yes, those funds were all making losses. But every single fund, and in fact, the Provident Fund made profit in 2017 for the first time, maybe in the last 4 years or so.
Let's try to understand the investments that obtain at the corporation. Your investment portfolio seems to be locally concentrated. I think with the exception of 2 investments. Correct me if I'm wrong. You had exposures with Standard Chartered Bank in terms of equity participation.
Equity, yeah.
CFRO has the same, Trust Bank the same, GAMCO. I mean, I know GAMCO has undergone liquidation. It's dead. Yes. Ocean Bay as well, and you mentioned GAM Petroleum. And GTSC, Gambia Transport Services Corporation, in which you own 100%. Yes, 100%. All of these, I mean, are equity exposures, and they're all within the Gambia. Systemic risk, I'm sure. I mean, you should know that more than me. You know, I mean, with your finance background, if the economy was to underperform badly, I think. Chances are, well, I mean, not negating the fact that, Standard Chartered, is an international, bank. So maybe, I mean, it is the out, I mean, it's the, lot that should be, out. And also, to some extent, CFRO. I mean, I don't know whether the CFRO is CFRO Gambia or is CFRO Group, as it were. But are you worried about, this the concentration risk, putting all of your eggs in one basket? And is this something that you would, look at strategically to perhaps begin to participate in other equities and other investment opportunities outside of the Gambia?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. The problem is investment opportunities in the Gambia is highly restricted. And the lack of opportunity for a greater portfolio diversity creates the downside risk that you mentioned. That's a fact. That's a reality we have to live with. There's really not much we can do with that. Clearly, within that concentration, we try to manage our risk. I think the only exposure really that I am kind of a bit worried is maybe in the banking sector, in the sense that we have like a 37% stake in Trust Bank and a 16% stake in Standard Chartered. It doesn't matter the fact that Standard Chartered is part of an international group, but the Standard Chartered Bank in the Gambia is a local bank in the Gambia. So whatever risk the banking sector faces, it will have a short-term impact on us. In fact, in 2017, we have seen that. Standard Chartered were not in a position to pay dividend because of the economy and its impact on them. And Trust Bank's dividend levels were not the same as it was in the prior years. So we are seeing the kind of concentration risk you're referring to. But that notwithstanding, I think our portfolio, within limits, right, it's a bit diverse. And yes, the country risk will have a significant impact on us if it was to happen. Right now, we are investigating because the 2015 Social Security Act has been amended to allow us to invest up to 25% of our assets offshore. So prior to that, we were not able to do that. But now we have an opportunity to invest 25% of our assets offshore. And we are investigating the possibility of doing that. But I'm sure you would agree with me. Offshore investments requires really in-house capacity to do the analysis, to do the sectors that you want to participate in, understand the risk, not only the risk in the business itself, but also the currency risk. But that notwithstanding, I think we're still investigating it. We actually looked at a couple of investment possibilities. We've not yet taken the decision to go offshore, but it is something that we are actively looking into so that we can diversify outside of the country. But also, as a pension fund, really, if we are going to make a difference, I think there is a difference between volatility and risk. Now, clearly, we may do some of these things in the short term, which may be negative. But like I said in the beginning, because of the nature of our funds, we can actually stay in an investment for 20, 30 years. Now, investment cycles, you will always have that. You will always have the ups and downs. Yep. But over a longer period of, say, 30 years, it will smoothen out. So really, I don't see much of a challenge. And we have to invest significantly in this economy to participate and make a difference.
Okay. Now, you spoke about the three things that must obtain at the Social Security if the Social Security was to deliver on its mandate, and also ensure that you realize, your legacy, the lean and nimble, ensuring that there is productivity, the staff as the staff is a whole lot more productive, and also the bit regarding automation. Yeah. I want to come to another point that is key and which seems to be a challenge in our economy, and that goes down to the issue of governance. You are the managing director and you are part of the governance structure. Actually, you are a key player. As long as that topic is concerned. Your board of directors, I was looking at it and realized that there are 13 people. The composition of the board. Is?
It's actually 8.
Okay, not as per the, okay, maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe you'll provide me with some clarification. But as per the 2015 accounts, the audited accounts, you had 10 members and 3 representatives. And of the 10 members, 2 are permanent secretaries from lands. Then you have 2 representatives for the National Provident Fund, 1 for the Federated Pension Scheme, and a representative from Office of the President, in addition to the chairman, the MD, and the deputy managing director. Okay. And the 2 of the 3 other representatives are staff of the corporation. So is it that it excludes some of these people that I've mentioned? And that's why it's...
Actually, the board structure, the size of the board, is actually defined by the Act. Okay. So in the Act, a lot of those people you refer to are actually not on the board. They should not be on the board. I know they were on the board prior to now, but the membership of the board should actually just be the chairman, the MD, the 2 ex officio members, which is the permanent secretary, Ministry of Finance, and permanent secretary, Ministry of Lands. Then you have the representative, the member representative. So you have 1 representing the Provident Fund members, the institutions. You have 1 representing the Federated Pension Scheme, member institutions. And you have 1 representing the active pensioners. Now they are stakeholders. So really, they should have somehow a say in the running of the corporation. And then you have a staff representative and the managing director. So that's 8. That's really the composition of the board. Okay.
Now, the reason why I raised this question, 2 reasons. One, I've looked at comparative, I've done a comparative in terms of the composition of your board and the composition of the boards of other social security and housing finance corporations, so it's equivalent in other countries. And specifically, I would make reference to the Housing Development Board of Singapore. If you look at the composition of the board of the Housing Development Board of Singapore, you don't have representatives that, like pensioners, having a representative of pensioners within the board. You don't even have permanent secretaries sitting, on the board. What you have is the chairman, the chief executive officer, and you also have representatives from, like, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, former managing directors of such institutions, former ministers, and if you look at their track record and in terms of what they've done, it bears some degree of relevance to the vision and the mission of the Social Security. I raised this question because, I've asked you, what is it that you want your legacy to be, when you leave the Social Security, and also, what is it, what 3 things must obtain at the Social Security in order for the Social Security to deliver its vision and mission. And all of the things that you have referred to are pretty much underpinned by governance. If the governance structure and the governance framework is not tight, tight in terms of efficient in itself, if you don't have the right people with the right and relevant knowledge and network, I don't think you will be successful in delivering on these. So are you happy with the composition of the board? I mean, I know it's not your mandate to appoint board members, but I believe you have an influence. I mean, I was the Director General at the Gambia Tourism Board. And ordinarily, I consulted with my minister. Actually, my minister, with all credit to her, would tell me that I was looking at X, Y, and Z, for the board. What do you think? And do you have other people that we could look into in order to have a very strong board, a board that would help you to deliver on your mandate? I don't know if such opportunities, I mean, I think the board is still the same, at the Social Security. But are you happy with the composition of the board, or do you think it can be improved?
Okay. I think there are two parts to the question. One is the size. Is the size adequate? I think for a board, anything from 5 to 13 is a good number in terms of governance. So I think 8 in itself, the size is okay. Now the question is about the structure of the board, the composition of the board. Are the members of the board with the right skill sets to actually move the corporation forward? I think right now we are constrained by the act in that the 3 members that you referred to are actually from the membership. Now that's not necessarily ideal to select from there, because we should be selecting from the best available skills that the board requires for its effective governance. Now selecting, if the pool is wide, you will actually be able to get it. But now how we select the membership from the schemes is through elections, through nominations. Now, a nomination sometimes can give you the best candidates. Sometimes it may not give you the best candidate. The current 3 we have from the representatives of the membership, I think they have the right skills and knowledge. So, because remember, our board is recently reconstituted. In fact, it was reconstituted around June, thereabout. So the new memberships from the 3 funds, they have the right knowledge, and I'm sure they do have the relevant experience. Now, clearly, the ex officio members, the individuals themselves, I think there is always there's an issue with actually selecting just ex officio because you're a permanent secretary. Because being a permanent secretary doesn't necessarily give you the right skill set for that particular role. So I think that in itself is an issue. But I think the members we currently have sitting on the board, both the PS Land and the PS local government. The PS local government was actually a one-time employee of Social Security. So he actually understands Social Security and he has relevant skills.
That's Mr. Sanyo.
Yes. So he has the relevant skills and experience to be on that board. And the PAMSEC for finance, who is now Motsise, he hasn't been on the board yet because he just moved to finance. But I know more of it. And again, as a person, I think he has the right skills. But on top of that, what this government is currently doing is recognizing the importance and relevance of the board of directors and actually trying to give them more independence in running the corporations. It's actually introduced a new corporate code of good governance. And in that corporate code, it actually defines the roles, the responsibilities of the board, and is also affording training to every board member to really upskill them so that they can effectively carry out their roles and responsibilities. But I agree with you. Boards can have better mix of skills. We can look, when you really set up a board, you should always be looking at where you want to go, what your strategy is, what is really your mission, vision, and really trying to bring in a mix of people with the skill set to make sure that you get to that level. So I think over time, governance in this country has been weak. There is no doubt about that. So I'm confident that as we go along this journey with what government is doing and what they are actively pushing to enhance the competencies of board members, I think we will get there.
Okay. Social Security has been in existence for 37 years, since 1981. and it has created, within the 5 housing estates that it has done so far, under 10,000 housing units. Because of interest of time, I would not go into specifics, but I think, you would agree. I want to draw some parallel. Social Security came in 81, but the Housing Development Board of Singapore came in 1960. But I just want to read something to you regarding the Housing Development Board of Singapore. Established on 1 February 1960, during our nation's housing crisis. They had a housing crisis. And Singapore was actually worse than Gambia. They both had independence the same year. Singapore was worse than Gambia. In terms of gross domestic product, you would not even compare the two. I'm sure you know the story. But continuing on, we were tasked with, this is the Housing Development Board, we were tasked with providing sanitary living conditions to replace the prevalent unhygienic slums and crowded squatter settlements. We delivered and built 21,000 flats in less than 3 years. Within a decade of our formation, we had built 54,000 flats. Singapore's public housing has housed an entire nation. Today, more than 1 million flats have been completed in 23 towns and 3 estates across the island. Housing Development Board flats are home to over 80% of Singapore's resident population, with about 90% of these resident households proudly owning their home. Now, what I want to ask is, and in line with your legacy, and also the 3 things that you mentioned in terms of the things that must obtain, for you to be able to realize what it is, what it is that you have your eyes, eyes on the prize on. Do you believe that some 15 years from now, and in the event you continue to head the corporation, that we would be in a position to have such statements made by the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation?
I would love to say yes.
Okay.
But I think I'll be over-ambitious if I say yes. I say, you see, unlike Singapore, we have 2 fundamental challenges which we have to overcome if we really need to address the housing problem in this country. The housing deficit in this country is somewhere around 60,000 units per year. Now that's a significant number. And you are right, since 1980, we only delivered 6,600 units. So that's a drop in the ocean. And we are the biggest estate company in this country. But this is the 2 problems. Number 1, the income levels for this country are extremely low. About 90, and I'm looking at data from ours, and which is statistically very significant. We have, from a data of about 57,000 employees, about 94% of those employees earn less than $2,500 per month. You can extrapolate that to the country, and really that's what you will be getting. Now, $1 million a house, even if you put an interest rate of, say, 10%, and which will be a gift in this country, given where interest rates are, and $1 million a house is not. It's not like a luxurious house or anything. It's like a basic 3-bedroom house. The repayment that even 10% interest will be somewhere like $8,000 a month. And that's beyond the affordability of at least 90% of the population. Now, to get to the kind of things you're asking, it really is finding. Now, if you have that, if you have availability of finance being problematic, given the interest rates, and then you have incomes at that level, really getting housing people then becomes a real challenge. So we have to find ways as a nation of how we address that. It almost goes without saying that to house people here, they must be subsidized. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Even a $200,000 a loan is a problem for the majority of the people, because $200,000 a loan will be like a repayment over a 15-year period will be somewhere around 1,500 or so. If you are earning 1,500, 1,500, internationally, you would expect mortgage repayment to be no more than 30% of your gross income. Now, if you're earning 25%, 1,500 is significantly, it's more than 50% of your gross income. So you can't afford it. Now we have to find a way as a nation of how do we deal with that problem, because those are structural issues, and it's not very easy to handle.
Let me just, for the interest of time, because I want us to get, a little bit more into this. I did make the comparative that in 1960, when the Housing Development Board of Singapore was being created, per capita GDPs, were higher in the Gambia than it was in Singapore.
Yes.
So naturally, these problems that you are alluding to existed at the time in Singapore. In general, 90% of the population of Singapore, or maybe, let's not be conservative and say that, okay, let's say 75% of Singaporeans were able to afford housing. But the GDP per capita was very low. Actually, and the reason why I read that, ad verbatim is just to make the point. These guys were squatters, pretty much. Yes. The living conditions were unhygienic, but the Housing Development Board of Singapore managed to put a scheme in place that had ultimately resulted in what we see today in Singapore. The skyline of Singapore today was pretty much, the catalyst was the Housing Development Board of Singapore. So the point I'm raising is it time that perhaps we revisit the housing scheme? I'll give you an example. I lived in Singapore for 2 years, and I know for a fact that if I had chosen to be an employee in Singapore, then what would have obtained is any business that I work for within Singapore, private or government, I am obliged to contribute 30% of my income towards, the Central Provident Fund of Singapore. And the Central Provident of Singapore looked at ensured three things. One, that that contribution was looking at housing, that contribution was looking at healthcare, and that Provident Fund was also looking at retirement. If you have housing and you have somebody taking care of your health care, and then you know that you're looking forward to a pension, pretty much the three necessities of any human being is addressed here. Absolutely. So is it time that we revisit the contribution scheme that obtains in the country if we are serious about the mission and the vision of Social Security to deliver the thing that it has set itself to deliver?
No, absolutely. I think there will be a need if you want to address those three things. Right now, the Provident Fund is only addressing one component of the three, which is the retirement. It certainly doesn't address the health, except for the injuries compensation fund,
which is minimal.
And very different, doesn't really give you much. And there is really no component for housing. We have allowed in Social Security for people to access their Provident Fund as to pay deposits towards their housing, really recognizing that you can use the saving to also provide shelter for you. But again, like I said, maybe it's something to look at more in detail. But when you have income levels at the levels I'm telling you, I think when Singapore started, it wasn't just relying on the Provident Fund to house. Yes, it was a strategy within the Provident Fund, but you must always start this thing with a seed capital, which is almost like subsidizing. And I said, that's what I'm saying. For us to actually grow, that's what we need. We need to have, you cannot use the Provident Fund to subsidize the housing, because once you do that, then you're jeopardizing people's retirement funds. But you need to get a seed capital, which basically acts as a subsidy. Now we're trying to experiment with one. We've tried to sell some plots in Bruceville that will give us some income. So we are trying to cross-subsidize from the higher income to the lower income and see whether we can use that. Maybe not even do flats, for example, and see whether we can use that to house people. So it may be rent to own, over a period of time. So because people cannot afford to buy, but you can do rent to own. Singapore did something like that over time to enable. And that may be the best way to get people into housing, and that's something that we are actively thinking about. And that's why a couple of months ago we did some plot sales.
Now, let me just come. Perhaps the last question that we would have a chance to discuss. If you look at the one of the things that Singapore did, and here I'm making reference to the Housing Development Board of Singapore, and perhaps this is one of the strategies that they've looked at, is they choose strategically where to invest. The contributions that they get from employees. And the NTUC You know, I mean, it's one of the areas where they invested. And these supermarket chains, insurance, and all of these things, you know, I mean, they invest in it. They don't manage it. They invest in it. And you would see that and they campaign on this, you know. So if you're an employee, you know that it's good for you to go and shop at NTUC supermarkets because indirectly you will be getting discounts, but also you are helping that business to grow, because if that business grows, this is also dividends that are coming toward, you know, to you in terms of your retirement. So are these things that also Social Security would be looking at in terms of helping, you know, to meet the housing welfare aspect of their mandate?
I think overall, in terms of improving our performance, I think we need to improve our performance and then cross-subsidize housing, which is what we intend to do. Like I said, we've been very conservative in the past, and we still are, because investment opportunities in this country are very restricted. But we're tasking our investment unit to actually go out and review possibilities we're looking at a number of sectors. We need to be investing more in the real economy so that we can generate. Certainly 8% returns on treasury bills is not where we should be. We shouldn't be there, one, because the returns are low, but we shouldn't be there because we're really not making any impact in the real economy. And so we are trying to divert our investment from those areas and more into the real economy. That will in turn help us to cross-subsidize housing, and in turn help us to meet our objectives in the vision and the mission of actually creating affordable housing.
Mr. Manjang, thank you very much. On that note, we will have to leave it at that.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Pleasure is mine.
And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Invited.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.